And why I would argue that really pensions reform is at the centre of the neoliberal revolution is that there is a very clear trajectory that the purpose of the reforms is partly practical. It's partly because people are very worried about the burden of pensions as a more state-run system and what that will do to future generations. So they're projecting ahead 40, 50 years in time, and they're worried that this system is becoming unsustainable. And of course, if you want a smaller state, you also have to think about how the future state might be a smaller state. So there's some practical and kind of quasi-economic ideology, state intervention ideology elements there. What's interesting about pensions, though, is it's also about making a new individual in a couple of ways. So the first way is that if you try and make pensions into a personalised product, where you as an individual invest effectively invest in the stock market, and your return is going to be how well those assets perform over time. The performance of that is all about you, fundamentally. It's about the choices you make when you invest, and it's dependent on the performance of your investment decisions and the underlying companies. An older model of a collective pension scheme smooths out that fluctuation. So the safety in numbers, fundamentally, that there's a guaranteed benefit that you're going to receive in a defined benefit scheme. And it's achieved by each generation contributing and not necessarily getting the full benefit of the happy economic circumstances at the time. Fundamentally, it's about hedging the risks of life through a collective endeavour, whereas personal pensions is very much around individual risk bearing and taking. Why do that? Two reasons. Makes an individual more engaged with the market, makes them aware of their role as an economic actor, makes them interested in the stock market, particularly configuring their portfolio, and it makes them take individual accountability for their decisions. And you can view that as purely kind of liberal economics, but actually at the time it was argued that people could make a decision not to invest in certain companies. So they could choose not to invest in companies associated in some way with the South African regime at the time. So people framed it as ability to make an ethical choice. So there's something about individual choice through a pensions market and a more liberalised regime there. The second element of this is that you're essentially asking individuals to have a stake in the British economy, and a direct stake. And that means that in future, when your opponents might propose nationalising parts of that industry, or might propose doing anything in the economy that would damage the stock market to an extent, or other assets, you have an inbuilt base of support, people who might be worried about the consequences of these things. So bearing the consequences of modifying capitalism, I think, is part of these reforms. The third element I'd mention to finish this off is that entrepreneurialism. The idea that you could use this investment, people paying into their pensions, to support more entrepreneurial forms of British capitalism. So a lot of it's tied up with being more entrepreneurial, that smaller players in the pensions market, you're going to support them to kind of come in and break up that market and make it more competitive. So there's certainly an element of the broader language of entrepreneurialism, broader aims of entrepreneurialism wrapped up in pensions reform as well. So I think that's why I'd say it's the centre of a revolution. As it happens, that revolution wasn't entirely successful, and in many ways some of the problems that British politics and British pensioners have had and are still going to have are because we didn't resolve some of the issues with that. So how do you make someone's retirement in old age very dependent on the moment they retire because of its relationship with the stock market? People are nervous about that. People don't want necessarily risk at a stage in their lives they can't predict. Others do, and they want to reap the benefits. So you have a lot of unresolved issues that come out from it. Fundamentally, though, the political settlement that's reached erodes the health of the pre-existing state system. So what you have in the end of this reform, towards the end of the 80s, is you have a new life given to personal pensions, and they're made to be reasonably attractive. The old alternative, which was a more state-based way of doing this with employers, is progressively made less and less attractive.